Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar that is brought to you by BMG Labtech in partnership with News Medical and is titled Get the Best of Your Microplate Reader and Recommendations for Use. A big thank you to the team at BMG Labtech for making today's event possible and to everyone in the audience for joining us from across the world. My name is Danny from NewsMed and I'm delighted to be hosting today's event for you. I'd first like to introduce today's fantastic speakers and then explain a little bit about the format for today's event. So firstly, I'm delighted to welcome Ann-Cathrin Volz. Ann-Cathrin works as an application specialist for BMG Labtech with a specific focus on cell-based assays. After her graduation in nutritional sciences at the University of Hohenheim, Germany, she completed her Ph.D. and postdoc in the field of tissue engineering. In her position, she can draw on her experiences in cell culture and related microplate-based assays to support customers in assay optimization for existing and emerging applications. And joining Anne is Martin Mangold. Martin also works as an application specialist for BMG Labtech. His focus is on biochemical assays and interaction studies. During his doctoral studies in pharmaceutical chemistry at the University of Bonn, he screened for specific inhibitors of enzymatic activity, which also included cell culture work, protein and antibody expression, and purification. He now uses his knowledge to support BMG Labtech customers in optimizing their results. A big welcome to you both. Today's webinar will run as two parts. In just a moment, Anne and Martin will begin a joint presentation before we move things into an audience Q&A. So if you have any questions at any stage, then please write them in the Q&A box, which you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will answer as many as we can following the presentation. Quick note that if you are watching this back on demand, then you can still ask your questions, but you will receive a reply via email. Finally, before we get started, the webinar is being recorded and we will, of course, share the link with you via email within the next 24 hours. So please do share that with anyone else you feel would benefit from watching today's content. And you can, of course, watch back on demand anything that you missed today. As I've mentioned, there will be a Q&A following the presentation, so do send those in at any stage during the webinar. And any we don't get to today will be followed up via email at a later date. Right, let's get things started with the presentation.
Yeah, hi, I'm Martin. Thank you for this opportunity to present today.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and welcome everybody also from my side. I will start with a brief overview of BMG Labtech and our portfolio, just in case you haven't heard of us before. We are a microplate reader manufacturer, but the special thing about us is that we are the only manufacturer on the market that is solely focused on microplate readers. In the meantime, we gained more than 30 years of experience in the field, and through the time, we managed very well to bundle relevant knowledge within the company, as we have very low fluctuation in the staff. In fact, more than 30% of our employees have been with the company for more than 15 years. In the meantime, we are represented in the 5-digit range in scientific publications in peer-reviewed journals. And based on these facts, it is hardly surprising that we were rated with 4.7 out of 5 by our customers on an independent online platform. We are providing microplate readers of various types, ranging from single mode to multi-mode instruments, from low-budget ELISA readers to high-throughput devices. And with our main product, the microplate readers, we also sell various accessories, like, for example, our atmospheric control unit or stackers, which provide you with real walk-away solutions for the medium to high throughput range. And we even offer all of that made in Germany. With our readers and accessories, we also provide you with a reader control software and a data analysis software called MAS. On this slide, you can see our headquarters in Germany with the beautiful castle of Ortenberg here in the background. At this place, our readers are not only conceived and developed, but also assembled and tested. Our readers are manufactured in Germany, but they are, of course, sold worldwide. And to this end, we built up a global network with 5 subsidiaries in Australia, Japan, France, the UK, and the US. And on top, we are represented in more than 50 countries worldwide by our local distributors. Our portfolio ranges from monochromator-based machines like the Vantastar, which is very compact and user-friendly, or our Clariostar, which is super sensitive and flexible and was especially developed for the assay development, up to high-end devices like our flagship reader, the Ferrastar FSX, which is super fast and very sensitive and was especially developed for high-throughput applications. We also offer single mode dedicated machines like the Spectrostar Nano for customers with very clearly defined needs. This machine is absorbance based. Further, the Omega series represents an entry-level filter-based machine for all needs. And then our exotic, the Nephelostar Plus, uses light scattering to measure applications like solubility or microbial growth. But now let's move on to the main goal of today's webinar, improving your microplate reader measurements. We will provide you with some tips and food for thought to get the best out of your microplate reader. We have divided these into 2 sections. We will start with everything that has to be considered before you set up your assay and you start to set up your protocol at the microplate reader, like, for example, the microplate color, the wavelength and the bandwidth, and the choice between bottom and top optics. And in the second part, everything that can or has to be adjusted while measuring at the microplate reader, like the focal height, different scan options, or the flash number, will be dealt with. So let's start with the decisions that have to be made in advance. One question that we are frequently asked is which microplate color delivers best results? Of course, there is no general answer to this question, as every plate color has its justification. So the ideal plate color strongly depends on the used detection mode. Okay, we will have a closer look at absorbance measurements, which are, for instance, used to evaluate ELISAs, quantify protein concentrations, or also to quantify nucleic acids. Since absorbance measurements use the transmission of light through a sample, it is of course self-explanatory that the microplate must be transparent for this type of measurement. But even within transparent plates, there are still some differences. While regular plates made out of polystyrene are only transparent down to about 300 nanometers, other plates, like for example those made out of cycloolefin, also allow light below 300 nanometers to pass through the plate. This may be completely irrelevant for most measurements, but DNA, for example, is measured at 260 nanometers, and dye-free protein measurements are also carried out at 280 nanometers. Here, the use of UV transparent plates is essential. In the graph here on the upper right of this slide, you can see the absorbance values of DNA samples that have been either measured in polystyrene plates, here shown in blue, or measured in cycloolefin plates. They are displayed in green here in the graph. And as you can see, the background absorbance of polystyrene plates completely masks the absorbance of DNA, which should show a clear peak at about 260 nanometers. When evaluated in cycloolefin plates, this is clearly visible. Yes, especially for absorbance measurements, the plate's influence on the meniscus formation also plays an important role. Some compounds show natural absorbance, and if you are aware of the specific extinction coefficient, you can use the obtained absorbance value from your measurement and directly calculate the concentration of your specific compound. For this type of calculation, you will also need the path length. The path length is defined as the height of the liquid of your sample, as shown in this scheme here. If there is a meniscus formed in your well, this may lead to a reduction of the path length. And if the path length is lower compared to the height that it would be in other plates, this may completely mess up with your results in the end. Here on the right-hand side, a water sample of the same volume was measured in wells of different microplates with a different surface treatment. And as you can clearly see, the tissue culture treated plates lead to a reduced path length compared to the other microplates. It is especially known that microplates with a hydrophilic surface lead to meniscus formation. Therefore, you always have to be aware of the surface treatment of your microplate. You have to reconsider if you really need it for your application. And if you still need it, you will have to check for meniscus effects. And if there are any present, you have to correct for the changed path length in your scenario. And for this correction, we also offer an automatic path length correction in our software. When it comes to fluorescence measurements, things look quite different. Here, no light has to transmit through the plate. Excited fluorophores emit light into all directions, so the emission signal can actually be detected from the same side of the plate from which the excitation light originally came from. A big hurdle in fluorescence measurements is, however, the unspecific excitation of background components. This background can dramatically reduce your assay window in the measurement. Black plates are recommended for fluorescence measurements as they partially absorb light and may quench the background signal. In the graph to the upper right, signal intensities of fluorophore standard curves measured in plates of different plate color are shown. Here, white plates lead to a substantial increase of the background as they amplify the present signal. But a higher signal is, of course, not bad itself. To see the actual effect, you have to look at the signal to blank ratio. Signal to blank shows the ratio of your specific signal divided by the background signal of your assay. So it gives you an idea of the dynamic window of your assay. So higher values are, of course, desirable here. Black plates lead to a maximum signal to blank ratio in this scenario, since they reduce the background, followed by black plates with clear bottom, clear plates, and white plate. Luminescence, on the other hand, inherently shows a low background signal, as there's no excitation event needed for luminescence measurements, and unspecific components are not that easily excited in this scenario. However, luminescent emission shows lower signal intensities compared to fluorescence in general. Therefore, the amplification effect of white plates is advantageous in this scenario. As shown here in the upper graph, the weak signals obtained from luminescent measurements are amplified in the white plates, leading to highest signals when using white plates, followed by white plates with clear bottom, clear plates, and black plates. This result is also reflected in the signal to blank evaluation, where white plates lead to highest signal to blank ratios, followed by white plates with clear bottom, clear plates, and black plates. It also has to be mentioned that there are gray plates available on the market, and next to signal amplification, those plates additionally reduce the well-to-well crosstalk. And with this, I will hand it over to Martin, who will provide you with some insights on bandwidth and wavelength selection now.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, now I would like to continue with the optical settings that are available on microplate readers. First up, the selection of measurement wavelengths. Each measurable light signal has a specific wavelength range for emission and/or excitation. As you can see in the example graph on the upper right, the excitation and emission spectra of a fluorophore here with both excitation and emission curve have a peak at which relative intensities are at a maximum. Excitation and emission wavelengths on a microplate reader should be chosen close to these maxima to improve the limit of detection. In this example, the excitation and emission wavelengths were set to 480 and 530 nanometers respectively. Importantly, excitation and emission should be selected with a difference of at least 30 nanometers to prevent signal transfer from the excitation to the emission channel. In the graph below, we plotted the detectable fluorophore concentration versus the used excitation wavelength. As you can see, Choosing an excitation wavelength near the excitation peak at 480 nanometers achieved the lowest detectable concentration. Moving away from the peak resulted in a loss in sensitivity and higher detectable concentrations. At this point, it is also important to remember that you don't measure at one distinct wavelength, but rather a wavelength range, which is defined by the bandwidth. For example, an emission wavelength setting of 450 nanometers with a bandwidth of 10 nanometers will result in a measurement in the range between 445 to 455 nanometers. Depending on your assay, it can be beneficial to use narrower or larger bandwidths for your measurement. For fluorescence-based assays, it is usually beneficial to use a narrower bandwidth for the excitation wavelengths to specifically excite your fluorophore. The emission wavelengths can be selected larger in order to record more of the emission signal depending on the fluorophore. However, bandwidths should not be chosen too large since this will lead to signal transfer and loss of sensitivity. You can see this in the graph to the upper right. Here we plotted the minimal detectable fluorophore concentration against different emission bandwidths. Low concentrations mean high sensitivity in this case. Bandwidths between 12 and 20 nanometers gave the lowest detectable concentrations, while a bandwidth of 30 nanometers resulted in a significant loss of sensitivity. In this case, we have a signal spill over due to the higher bandwidth. For luminescence-based assays, usually larger bandwidths are beneficial, which you can see in the figure to the lower right, since more light can be collected from a sample while blank signals remain largely the same. Ideally, this results in high signal-to-blank values. Here we plotted the signal-to-blank ratio against different emission bandwidths. As you can see, signal-to-blank ratios increase significantly with the increase in bandwidth. However, even here, there's an optimal bandwidth to achieve best results, depending on the luminophore. Choosing bandwidths that are larger than the optimum can result in a drop of signal-to-blank ratios. Another point to consider in regard of wavelengths and bandwidth is the choice between filters and monochromators. Filters offer higher sensitivity in comparison to monochromators, but are limited to a specific wavelength and bandwidth. This increased sensitivity is especially beneficial when performing assays near the limit of detection. While filters might be more sensitive, monochromators offer huge flexibility by allowing manual selection of excitation and emission wavelengths and bandwidths. But ideally, you want both flexibility and sensitivity, right? For this purpose, BMG Labtech developed the patented LVF monochromators that offer the full flexibility of a monochromator combined with filter-like performance, a feature you don't see with conventional monochromators. As you can see in the figure below, 3.5 times more light passes through the LVF in comparison to conventional monochromators, and they are at a near filter-like performance. While in many cases it is sufficient to select wavelengths and bandwidths based on a signal molecule, some assay systems with high background signals may need further adjustments. One such example that specifically impacts fluorescence measurements is autofluorescence. Autofluorescence is caused by fluorescent assay components, usually in the green to blue spectral range, that interfere with the actual fluorescent measurement. This often occurs in cell-based measurements as many cellular as well as cell culture media components fluoresce. To highlight this problem, we compared different assay solutions regarding the impact on the signal-to-blank ratio. If the background noise is high, this will result in small signal-to-blank ratios. Accordingly, a large signal-to-blank ratio is desired. Autofluorescence can be reduced by adjusting assay components, as is highlighted by the graph on the upper right. Specifically in cell-based applications, alternatives to regular autofluorescence media, which is the column to the right of the graph, such as phenol red-free media, which are the next two columns you see in the graph, serum-free media, and PBS, which gave the best signal to blank ratio in this case, should be used. As you can see, this can lead to significant improvements in results. Try also to switch to redshifted dyes. This is also nicely highlighted in the graph on the lower right. Since autofluorescence mainly concentrates to the blue to green wavelength range, using redshifted dyes instead of blue or green ones can improve signal to blank ratios. As you can see in this example, comparing GFP and RFP signal to blank values. With this slide, I would like to conclude the considerations that should be taken in regard of wavelength and bandwidth selection. And with that, I hand over to Anne again, who will cover further adjustments that can be made in the measurement protocols.
Okay, thanks for these insights, Martin. Talking about potential options to reduce the negative effects of autofluorescence, the use of bottom optics is also a good idea in some scenarios. When working with BMG Labtech readers, that is actually nothing that you have to decide long in advance before you start your measurements. The switch from top to bottom optics can actually be done with just one click in the software. What you, however, need to think about in advance is which plate you're going to use for your measurements. Similar to absorbance assays, light has to travel through the bottom of the plate when using the bottom optics. Therefore, you again have to use plates that at least have a transparent button. Bottom optics should be used especially when your target is located at the well bottom and or if you have unspecific fluorescence in the supernatant of your sample. This is, of course, especially the case for cell-based assays with adherent cells and cell culture medium, including serum and phenol red. In this example here in the graph on the right side, you can see the signal to blank ratio of red fluorescent cells. Those cells were measured in different supernatants, in PBS, which has very low autofluorescence, as we just heard, in medium with serum, and in medium containing serum and phenol red. Those cells have been measured with either the top optics here shown in red or with bottom optics shown in pink. And as you can see, especially when the supernatant contains autofluorescent components like serum or phenol red, the bottom optics lead to a substantial increase in the signal to blank ratio compared to the use of the top optics. So much for the decisions that have to be made in advance. Let's now move on to the basic parameters that you have to adjust in the control software when measuring with the reader. And one of them is the focal height. Focal height is defined as the distance between the detection system and the microplate or your sample. And this parameter is actually not only relevant for assays where the signal is concentrated to the well bottom. In most assays, the target fluorophore is distributed homogeneously in the whole liquid. Nevertheless, the obtained signal intensity is not the same in all planes of your microwell. So usually the ideal focal height can be found just below the liquid surface. When working with BMG Labtech readers, you can select between manual or automatic focal adjustment as shown in the graph on the left here on the slide. The best focal height can be identified by comparing the signal to blank ratios or the signal intensities at different heights in your well. The automatic focal adjustment will check the signal at different planes and set your focal height to the peak of the generated curve. The software will even display the focal height curve to you. In this scenario, displayed in the graph on the right here, the optimal focal height would be about 9 millimeters. The graph also makes it clear that even a slight deviation from the optimal focal height may result into a significant reduction of the signal to blank ratio, depending on the assay, of course, but this applies in both directions, with a too low or a too high focal height. Focal height should be adjusted on the brightest sample to be expected in order to obtain a robust data for the generation of the focal curve. And although automatic focal adjustment reliably does this job for you, you should still make sure to use the same sample volume in all wells of your plate. Otherwise, the optimal focal heights may vary from well to well. Let's move on to scan options. Usually, all measurements per well are done in the center of the well at one single measurement point. This is sufficient, of course, in most cases, especially when you're working with very homogeneous and liquid samples. However, it is a different story when working with heterogeneous samples, like again, those adherent cell cultures. When looking at the signal distribution here on this slide on the lower right, where adherent fluorescent cells are shown with very high signals indicated in red and very low signals indicated in purple, it is absolutely clear that measurements all concentrated or limited to the center of this well will not be sufficient to represent all cells or the different signal intensities of this well. For such kind of assays, we offer scan options. With those scan options, the several measurements are spread across the well bottom, as it can be seen for the option of matrix scanning at the upper right panel of this slide. Those several measurements will then be averaged eventually after the measurements have been done. This is, of course, beneficial for adherent cell cultures, but also for other heterogeneous samples, like, for example, aggregation assays or microbial growth assays. When using the matrix scan that I just showed, you can even decide to exclude single measurement points or whole areas from your measurement after the measurement has been done. Next to the matrix scan, we also offer spiral averaging or orbital averaging. This graph here on the right side shows the percent CV of several replicate wells. Percent CV is the coefficient of variance and describes data variability. As you want to obtain reliable and robust data, of course, from each of your replicates, a low coefficient of variance is, of course, desirable in this scenario. And as you can tell from the graph showing the percent CV of wells, including fluorescent cell samples, scan options help to reduce data reliability substantially. In this example, matrix scan delivered the lowest percent CV, followed by spiral averaging and orbital averaging, while the simple measurement in the well center delivers the highest percent CV and thus the worst result. With all these advantages in mind, it must of course also be taken into account that multiple measurements when using scan options and the plate movements or the movements of the transport system associated with it just take more time. So it is therefore always necessary to balance between accuracy and time expenditure. So much for me. Martin will now continue with other important parameters such as gain and flash number.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, and now we have arrived at the point just before starting your measurements. Still, there are some parameters left that can be optimized for best measurement results. One important parameter is the gain setting. The gain is a factor that defines the amplification of an incoming light signal by the microplate reader's detection system and influences the measurement range of a microplate reader, which you can see on the upper right. Simply put, a high gain will amplify the incoming signal to a greater extent and is thus suitable for samples with low signal intensities, while a low gain will amplify the incoming signal to a lower extent. Thus, it is very important to set the gain appropriately. To highlight this, we measured a fluorophore standard curve using different gain values. The optimal gain value after gain adjustment was, in this case, 589, and two additional gain values below and above the optimum were chosen. As you can see in the graph to the lower right, we used this data and plotted the measurement values over sample concentration. As you can see, a gain that is set to is too high, which is the purple and the pink curve, will result in signal saturation, since the incoming signal is amplified too much. On the other hand, if the gain is set too low, the curves are a little bit flatter, and this can result in samples with low signal intensities that they might not be amplified enough anymore and might not be distinguishable from the measurement background in the end. To optimize the gain setting, it is typically adjusted on the brightest sample on a microplate. Using the optimal gain resulted in the best signal to blank ratios, which you can see in the graph to the upper right, with the optimal gain at 589 as before. To show this, so highlight this principle here, we calculated the signal to blank ratio of a single fluorophore standard that was measured using different gains. Again, next to the optimal gain, we used several other gain values below and above the optimum to highlight its effect. We then plotted the signal to blank ratio against the used gain values. As you can see, gain values that were too high or too low in comparison to the optimum reduced the signal to blank ratio further and further. Naturally, this had an impact on the achievable limit of detection, which is depicted in the graph on the lower right. The lowest and best limit of detection and sensitivity was reached using the optimal gain of 589, while even small variations from the optimal gain impacted the limit of detection, the worse the sensitivity is and the limit of detection in the end. Another parameter which can be taken into consideration when optimizing a measurement is the number of flashes. To give you a short explanation how they work, with each flash, the sample is illuminated and measured once. When using multiple flashes on a microplate reader, an average is formed from the separate measurements. This helps to reduce the effect of outliers, which can naturally occur in the measurement process. An appropriate number of flashes thus ensures accurate and reliable data. In general, data variability, which is depicted in the graph on the upper right, is reduced with the increasing number of flashes. To show this, here again we measured multiple fluorophore standards ranging from concentrations of 1 to 0.001 nanomolar using different flash numbers. And in this graph here, data variability in %CV was then plotted against the number of flashes. As you can see, while 1 and 0.1 nanomolar samples had low variability even when using only one flash, variability was significantly increased for low concentration and blank samples, which are the two pink curves and the gray curve in the graph. Here, an increase in number of flashes resulted in a decrease in variability, which is desired. For most assays, 10 to 20 flashes are sufficient to achieve good results, as was the case here. This gave variability values between 2 and 3%, even for blank and low concentration samples. Thus, using more than 20 flashes only resulted in minor improvements of variability. Measurement time is also affected by the number of flashes. With more flashes, as you can see in the graph to the lower right, the measurement time increases. In this example, using 10 to 20 flashes will help prolong the flash lamp lifetime as well as keep the measurement time short. As a final parameter for measurement optimization, I would like to highlight the integration time. This parameter is mainly important in luminescence detection, but also in time-resolved fluorescence measurements. It defines the time window that a microplate reader uses to collect light signals from a sample. Longer integration times can be used to benefit assays with a low photon yield over time, while short integration times can be used for assays with high photon yields. Luminescence-based detection, the appropriate integration time is often determined by the assay type, which we can see nicely highlighted in the two graphs to the right. Flash luminescence shows a very fast decay of emission signal with high signal intensities shortly after the start of the luminescence reaction. Accordingly, as you can see here, shorter integration times should be chosen. Glow luminescence, on the other hand, which you see in the graph to the lower right, is defined by a slower emission decay, but also by low photon yields over time. Accordingly, here, a longer integration time is beneficial to get the best results. In the special case of time-resolved fluorescence applications, I don't show data here, but just to explain it shortly, a fluorescent sample will emit light over a longer period of time. Here, an integration time window is chosen at which the sample still emits light, but any background signal has already subsided. To highlight the effect of integration time, we plotted the data variability and the data quality in a set prime value of glow luminescence samples against the integration time. As you can see in the two graphs to the right, on the one hand, we have, with longer integration times, a reduced data variability, which you can see in the upper right graph, while also the data quality, overall data quality, is increased with the higher integration time, which is of course also desirable. However, in the end, the advantages of longer integration times must always be weighed against the required measuring time that increases accordingly. We want to conclude today's presentation with a short summary of the most important parameters for optimizing microplate reader measurements. When planning a measurement, choose the appropriate microplate color. Also check if your assay system is influenced by autofluorescence, adjust the assay components, and use bottom optics where required. Optimize bandwidths and wavelengths to achieve best results. This will often differ and highly depend on the fluorophore or luminophore you are using. Before starting a measurement, make sure that the optimal gain is set or perform an adjustment, which can easily be done automatically on a microplate reader. Make sure that the focal height is optimized properly and use scan options whenever you have a heterogeneous signal distribution in the well. Keep in mind that in most cases 10 to 20 flashes are sufficient and that dependent on the application, longer integration times can be used and can be useful to reduce data variability and increase data quality. With this, we are at the end of our talk. Thank you for listening. If you would like more information, you can visit our website at www.bmglabtech.com or write us an email at applications@bmglabtech.com or contact us via our chat function on our website. Yeah, thanks again. And now we are happy to answer any of your questions.
All right, thank you very much, Anne. Thank you very much, Martin. As Martin just said, we are going to move into the Q&A part of the webinar now. Just before we do, though, just a few notices to let you know that the recording will be sent to the email which you registered within the next 24 hours. So please, when you get that, do share that internally with anyone else you think would benefit from rewatching today's webinar. And of course, you can watch back anything that you've missed so far. There is a handout you should be able to find on the left-hand side of your screen with some more information. So do take a look at that before you leave today. And if you do have any questions, a few people have already sent them in. You can continue to do that now. So Martin, Anne, we've got you back on. So I'll come to you with the questions. The first one is asking which plates are the best choice for alpha screen assays?
Okay, well, alpha screen can in general be categorized as a luminescence measurement. So we will need the amplifying effect here of white plates, so this is desirable here. However, crosstalk, of course, also plays a role, and that's why maybe gray plates are also a good choice. It also has to be considered that for alpha screen, there is also an excitation event. So there's some background arising from this method. And that's also another reason why black or gray plates in this case are recommended for alpha screen. So yeah, we would recommend gray plates for this kind of measurement.
Superb. This next one's asking, can I get filters only with a bandwidth of 10 nanometers, or is there a certain degree of flexibility?
So I think I might answer this. Yeah, there's a degree of flexibility. So we at BMG Labtech offer a large range of filter options for specific wavelengths with multiple bandwidth options. So for selected wavelengths, we can offer filters with wider bandwidths than 20 nanometers up to 100 nanometers bandwidth, or narrower bandwidths. So normally 10 nanometer bandwidths are available for most wavelengths, but there might be even lower wavelengths available for certain filters. But of course, as mentioned earlier, full flexibility in the selection of bandwidth is of course provided by the AVF monochromators available in the Mantastar and the Clariostar.
Perfect. The next one's saying normally red fluorescent dyes have a lower photon yield. How is it then that you have obtained more signal with red fluorescent dyes than with the green dyes, as shown, I think, on slide 16?
Yeah, this was one of my slides, I think. So yeah, what we see so it's true, red fluorescent dyes show lower photon yields. However, what is depicted on slide 16 was the signal to blank ratio. So even though the fluorescent dye has a lower photon yield, the red one, you get a better signal to blank value due to the much lower background signal you have compared to the green fluorescent range. So while you don't get more signal from the red fluorescent dye, distinguishing it from the measurement background is easier in this case.
Fantastic. Keep the questions coming in, everybody. We'll try get through as many as we can over the next sort of 10, 15 minutes or so. The next one's saying, I know there are also plates with a glass or quartz bottom. Would you recommend these for use with bottom optics?
Well, yeah, of course, quartz or glass bottom shows a very high transmission rate through the whole wavelength range from 220 to 1000 nanometers. So they are, of course, a good choice, especially also for UV measurements, measuring DNA and so on. However, those plates, especially those made out of quartz, are very expensive. So it always has to be weighed up whether this additional financial expense is worth it, or if maybe regular plates made out of polystyrene or cycloolefin, as shown in the beginning, especially for DNA measurements, are maybe sufficient for the application to be used.
Okay, just a reminder that there is a handout in the left-hand side of your screen for everyone to download. So please take a look at that before you leave the webinar today. The next question is asking, or they're stating, in their institute, we have different readers available for use. Should I use the same gain on all readers to keep the data comparable?
Yeah, so we typically recommend to optimize the gain value for each device individually. Since the gain value is an artificially set multiplication factor, and its determination and range is different between different readers. So a gain of 1000 on one reader won't yield the same results as a gain of 1000 on another reader. To optimize the gain individually is especially important in the case of microplate readers from different manufacturers, as the gain range will differ substantially between manufacturers.
The next one's just saying, how are crosstalk between wells in white plates for luminescent measurements? Is that something to consider before choosing the white plates for luminescent measurements?
Well, first of all, there are two forms of crosstalk. So the one form derives from above the wells, from neighboring wells, light from neighboring wells reaching the detector. And then the second form of crosstalk is when light travels through the walls of a plate to neighboring wells. So especially for the second form that I just mentioned, white plates definitely show a higher light transmission than, for example, black plates or gray plates. There are, of course, also differences between the different providers, but in general, white plates show, are worse for crosstalk. What can you do about it? Of course, you can just use gray plates. That's an option definitely that you can consider beforehand. On BMG Labtech readers, we also offer a mathematical crosstalk correction that you can prepare with a plate that you plan to use later beforehand. You can, of course, also use other plate formats. For example, plates with round wells are beneficial compared to plates with square wells, as in this type of plates, you don't, the wells just don't share a wall. So that helps here. And what you can also do, if you do not have the crosstalk correction and everything available on your reader, you can adjust your layout. So you could simply leave out an empty row or an empty column in between your samples. To the second part, the crosstalk above the wells, some providers and also BMG Labtech offers an aperture, which physically excludes light from neighboring wells. On another note, maybe also in flash luminescence, crosstalk doesn't really play a big role, as signal is only, derives only from wells where reagent has just been added. So it is only, signal is only available right after the addition and doesn't really play a big role when moving on to the next wells then.
Fantastic.
I think that's it.
Yeah, very detailed answer. Thank you very much, Anne. We've got one here that's just asking, does it make sense to choose a certain wavelength for luminescence measurements?
So I will answer this, I guess. So normally, if you use only one luminophore, it is not necessary to select the wavelength, as the background signal is basically not present over the whole measurement range or whole wavelength range. So actually, it's better to select the whole wavelength range here, as this will ensure that as much sample signal as possible is collected by the reader. A special case is, of course, if you use multiple luminophores in a multichromatic. In this case, it makes sense and is actually important to select specific wavelengths to distinguish the different luminescence signals.
Fantastic. Next one starts off by saying thank you very much for the talk, and we've had lots of positive comments and chat messages already coming in. And Martin, so thank you again for sharing your expertise. Just a quick note that once the webinar finishes, there will be a survey that appears on your screen, so please do share your feedback for Martin and Anne there. We'd really appreciate that. So this question, they start off by thank you for the talk, and they would like to know how to set gain in kinetic fluorescent assays where inflorescence expected to increase throughout time.
So for these assays, you can set the target value of the reader. So in this case, normally in normal assays, you set it to 90%. In case you have assays that don't have, you don't know where you will end up with, you can set it to 10%. So that makes sure that you have a large measurement range to get all the measurement data during the measurement. What I would also like to mention here is, of course, the EDR feature that is available on the Vantastar and the Clariostar, so the enhanced dynamic range, which automatically adjusts the gain value over the whole measurement time. So in these cases, you don't even need to worry about the gain. It will be adjusted and controlled by the reader.
Yeah, there's another question from the same person asking, is it possible to make dual measurements on the same sample at the same time in the kinetic assays?
In general, yes, as long as your reader is equipped with both detection modes, there are options to set up a kinetic and do multiple cycles with the two detection modes sequentially. So you would, for example, do a measurement for 1 hour,
do an absorbance measurement and a fluorescence measurement at time point 0, and then do the same thing again after 5 minutes, and so on and so on. So that's absolutely possible, yes.
There's a question that's come in there asking if the handouts are all available. They only see how-to notes on the left side of the screen. Yes, so the how-to notes are the handouts, so please do take a look at that. And Martin, any notes on the how-to notes for the audience? Any thoughts on it?
Well, not really, just maybe to mention that our library of how-to notes is still growing. So what you can find when following the link that we entered into the handout section, you will find the ones that are available right now. Should be 6 at the moment. But yeah, we're still working on other topics. So also if you have any suggestions, any topics that you would like to have covered with our how-to notes, we are happy to read your ideas.
Super. And just a reminder, on your screen, you can obviously see the contact details for the team at BMG Labtech. When you get your email with the on-demand link tomorrow, you can also reply to that directly, and we'll forward that message onto the team there. Just one more question at the moment, and Martin, I don't know if you want to have another quick look through the questions to see if there's anything we've missed. But I'll go ahead and ask this one. They're asking what plate, gain, and beam focus settings should be used for the 384 well-based solubility measurements on the Niflo Star Plus, and apologies for butchering the name there.
Well, there's no general answer to this question, since the settings and also the ideal plate format and everything that can be set in the control software strongly depends on the sample that is used. So yeah, if you need some more details, yeah, and are happy to share the details of your planned essay with us, please just contact us, and we're more than happy to go through it with you in more detail and give you advice.
Perfect. I think we've tackled all the open questions there. There's loads of comments again. Thank you for the amazing seminar. Lots of nice emojis coming through too. So big thank you. And Martin, I don't know if you have any final thoughts before we wrap things up now.
Yeah, thank you for listening. So I guess we have a few open questions that are still open, so we will answer them later on and come back to you via email as time is up. So yeah, look forward to this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, and thank you again, Martin. Thank you to everyone in the audience from tuning in across the world. Final reminder to look out in your inbox over the next 24 hours for the link to the recording. Please do share your thoughts in the survey that will be appearing on your screen in just a moment. And yeah, big thank you again for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you all again very soon. And I wish you all a very pleasant rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.